Hi, I'm Colleen. My sister humiliated me in front of hundreds of people at her wedding, called me a failure, a mistake, a woman with no worth. But that wasn't the worst part. The real pain, years of secrets, of being erased, of being silenced by the people who were supposed to protect me. What would you do if your own family turned you into a punchline, and the world believed them? I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. A text from a colleague, nothing out of the ordinary, until I opened it. Hey, is this really you? There was a link, a video, 30 seconds long. My face, my voice, or what sounded like my voice, talking about losing control at work, getting hospitalized, being too unstable to lead anything. I watched it 3 times. Each time the chill behind my eyes spread wider. The lighting was fake, the editing, obvious, but the damage, real. By noon, my inbox was flooded. Comments under my latest video turned from supportive to suspicious. One brand paused a campaign we were supposed to launch that week. Someone tweeted, "No wonder she vanished for 6 months, drama queen meltdown." I didn't respond. I just watched it all unfold. I stayed still, but my silence wasn't surrender. It was recognition. I'd seen this tactic before, years ago in a much smaller war. This time, though, it had digital teeth. By sunset, my fingers were numb. I ran the video through a forensic audio tool. The waveform was off, tiny skips in the frequencies. A manufactured voice stitched together to sound like mine. Deepfake tech, too clean to be amateur. Someone wanted this to spread. Someone who knew exactly how to strike without being seen. Jody's name hit me before the data confirmed it. The trail led back to a boutique PR firm in Miami, one she'd worked with last year for a rebranding project. The connection was enough. Enough to know it wasn't random. Enough to know it was personal. 16 years ago, I stood in the hallway outside our father's office with a bloody nose and a busted cello case. Jody had lied, told Dad I'd broken it on purpose. He didn't even ask me what happened. He just looked at me and said, "She's composed. You're chaos." Some stories never change. They just scale. I could have called her, confronted her. I didn't. Not yet. Not because I was scared, but because I needed more. I needed it documented, quiet, precise, measured. I needed to speak in a language they never understood. Evidence. I opened the folder I'd been building for years, titled simply, Family Records, Screenshots, Texts, Audio Clips, Dates, moments I once told myself I was being paranoid to save. Turns out I wasn't paranoid. I was early. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened my camera, not to film, to speak. "You wanted a war disguised as a celebration?" My voice didn't shake. "Fine, I'll RSVP with a broadcast." I tapped record. The DeVoe estate looked exactly as I remembered, timeless and lifeless, a plantation-style mansion with pillars that tried too hard to matter. The hedges were sculpted, the lawn flawless, perfection curated to silence everything ugly that lived inside. I was invited, though we all knew I was summoned. The family gathering was held in the drawing room, a space where emotions went to die. Jody greeted me with a tight-lipped smile, the kind that said, "You should have stayed home." Dad didn't bother looking up from his drink. The others barely acknowledged me. Just eyes, measuring, watching. "Glad you could make time," Jody said sweetly. "We weren't sure you'd show up, given everything going around online." I smiled. I make time for what matters. The table was already set. The power dynamic was, too. Franklin sat at the head. Of course he did. Everyone else was just decoration. He cleared his throat. "Let's not waste the evening with false pleasantries." His gaze didn't land on me until the last word. "There are structural changes coming to the family trust, necessary realignments, strategic." My fingers curled under the tablecloth. He continued, "As of this month, your sister Jody will take full oversight of the foundation and all its assets. It makes sense, given her reliability and public image." Public image. I waited for someone, anyone, to say something. But no one moved. The silence was thick, like syrup choking a scream. Franklin didn't just rewrite the legacy. He deleted me from it. Then he added casually, "Of course, Colleen, you're always welcome to apply for a grant, like any other public applicant." That line cut deeper than anything he'd ever said, and he knew it. The smirk he gave me afterward was surgical. I didn't speak. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. That night, back in my apartment, a secure email landed in my inbox. No sender, no greeting, just one subject line. Thought you should know. Attached were scanned files, signed documents showing Franklin had already transferred assets months ago, agreements I'd proposed for women's mental health funding, now listed under Jody's name. Every word I'd written, every connection I'd built, vanished in ink, reassigned like I was a footnote in my own life. I stared at the screen long after the file stopped loading. This wasn't just personal, it was tactical. Deliberate erasure. I opened a folder labeled legal, then one labeled backup. Then I made a new one. Legacy theft. I scanned everything in. He didn't know I had the drafts, the time-stamped proposals, the original signatures. He thought I was emotional. He forgot I was meticulous. I poured myself a glass of wine. The red clung to the side of the glass, thick like consequence. I sat in silence, the kind that didn't stretch. It tightened. You took my place in this family, I whispered. Fine, I'll take yours in history. And then, with one click, I uploaded the originals to a locked server. Let them have their curated legacy. I had something better. The truth. The email came in just after 7 a.m. I hadn't even made it to the kitchen yet. I was still wrapped in the quilt from my grandmother, the one she gave me when I left home for college, the one Lorraine never even looked at. There was no greeting, no subject line, just one sentence, cold and polished like every word my mother ever weaponized. For the family's dignity, don't attend. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stared at the screen until my coffee went cold and the room lost color. 16 years ago, I stood in our kitchen with balloons clutched in my hands, watching Lorraine cut a vanilla cake, the flavor she knew I hated, because Jody likes it and we shouldn't waste. That day was my birthday. Somehow this email felt colder than that forgotten cake. I closed the laptop and sat there. No reply, no reaction. Not yet. It wasn't even worth a fight. Why can't you be more like Jody? She listens. That line had lived in my bones longer than most memories. It had its own room inside me. Later that day, I opened a shared folder I'd been quietly granted access to through a former intern at Jody's PR firm. My gut said there was more coming. I just didn't expect it to be this deliberate. Slide 17, The Family Disappointment. That was the title, not even subtle. Bullet points followed. My divorce, my mental health leave, my lack of economic contribution to the family. No legacy. That one cut the deepest. Lorraine's initials were in the corner of the revision history. Approved for inclusion. So that's what I was. A punchline in a slideshow. I could feel my pulse behind my eyes, but I didn't scream. Screaming was for people who expected to be heard. Instead, I opened an old notebook. My therapy journal from 3 years ago. On the last page was a line I had written during one of the darkest weeks of my life. If I disappeared, would anyone in my family notice? Today, I had my answer, but I also had something else. Clarity. Clarity can be colder than rage and infinitely more dangerous. I scanned every page of that slideshow, annotated, time-stamped, archived. Then I made a call. Adam, it's Colleen. You still working media security? Yeah, what's going on? I need you to set up a live broadcast link. Encrypted, remote accessible, untraceable. There was a pause. You finally gonna show the world who they really are? I looked at the glowing file name on my screen. Counter-narrative. No, I'm gonna let them do it themselves. I knew something was wrong the moment Caleb called and didn't use my name. Hey, he said too casually. Got a weird meeting today, just corporate politics, nothing serious. That was how Caleb lied, by downplaying things that could bury him. He didn't say more, and I didn't push. Not then. 2 hours later, I was in the lobby of his office building downtown, staring at the reflection of a woman who wasn't just preparing for war. She was already inside it. When he saw me, he looked tired. There was a folder on his desk, one corner curled, like it had been clutched too tightly by someone trying to hold back rage or fear. They sent someone, he said. 2 men in suits. Claimed they were interested in investing, but really, they were here to talk about you. My mouth stayed still. My spine didn't. They said, If I kept supporting you, I'd lose everything. Caleb sat down heavily. They used the word exposure, said my name would be dragged into whatever's coming next. I'd be collateral. I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I already knew. I knew Franklin's tactics. He didn't just hit people. He made sure you hit yourself first. Do you believe them? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. I believe they're not bluffing. Later that night, I got a second call from Caleb's legal team. One of their junior analysts flagged a clause in an incoming contract. It was buried deep, written in vague language, but the result was clear. If Caleb signed it, Franklin would gain proxy control over his intellectual assets. A noose disguised as a handshake. It wasn't business. It was punishment. Caleb didn't sign. He terminated the entire deal. And for that, I loved him more than I could say. But I didn't say it, not yet. Instead, I forwarded him a copy of an audio file I'd saved for years. Franklin's voice, crisp, cruel, calculated. He's a fool if he thinks love is stronger than leverage. Caleb sent back a single word. Noted. I spent the rest of the evening at my lawyer's office, scanning, encrypting, organizing. Every file had a name. Every name was a trigger. Every trigger had a timeline. Franklin thought fear would keep me quiet. He forgot who he taught strategy to. Before midnight, I opened a folder marked Final Strike Active. I added 3 new files, labeled them in all caps. Then I called my father, straight to voicemail. I've warned you once, I said. You won't get another. The message popped up on my screen like it had been waiting all day to ruin my evening. No subject, no sender, just this link. Might want to check slide 23. I knew before I clicked. I just didn't know how far it would go. Slide 23 wasn't just another petty jab. It was war. Bullet points scrolled across my screen. My divorce. My therapy history. A screenshot of my bank statement from 2 years ago, when I had $38 to my name. Phrases like emotionally unstable, failed legacy, toxic attachment issues. It wasn't just cruel. It was clinical, calculated. There was only one person who had access to that information. Celia. Celia, who held my hand the night I broke down sophomore year. Celia, who slept on my couch after her father left her mom for a yoga instructor half his age. Celia, who knew my passwords, my secrets, my fear of going back to being invisible. I called her. No answer. I texted, read, no reply. Why would you do this? I sent one last time. It stayed blue. Forever. I didn't need her response. I already had the answer. 6 years ago, I stood outside a grant pitch conference, watching Celia walk out in tears. She'd just been humiliated on stage, blindsided by a rigged rejection. Later that week, Jody's name appeared as the recipient of that same award. I thought it was a coincidence. Now I know better. Franklin had orchestrated it. Snuffed out Celia's shot so Jody could shine brighter. That's how it worked. If you got in their way, they crushed you. Or turned you into one of them. Celia didn't betray me for ambition. She did it to survive. And I hated that I understood her. But understanding didn't mean forgiving. Not this time. I spent the next 4 hours cataloging every file she had leaked. Each doc, each edit timestamp, each server signature. I cross-checked it with our old email threads. The proof was sickening in its completeness. Then I encrypted it. I wrote up a cease and desist and sent it directly to the wedding planner. I made sure the subject line screamed in bold, "Legal notice, unauthorized use of private materials." They'd pretend they didn't see it, but it would haunt them. I dragged the final presentation into a new folder, labeled it reversal.mp4. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't ask why. They thought I'd spiral, I muttered, staring into the monitor. But I only spin toward precision. The last thing I did before logging off was whisper, "Let them laugh. They won't be able to speak when I'm done." The room glittered. Chandeliers sparkled above a sea of sequins and polished shoes. The Bellwood Grand Ballroom smelled like money, crisp champagne, floral arrangements flown in from God knows where, and ego. Layers and layers of ego. I stood near the back in a navy blue dress. No one noticed me. That was the point. Jody and Brent entered to thunderous applause, like royalty returning from war. She beamed. He smiled with the stiff politeness of a man who'd made a costly mistake and was trying to smile through it. I sipped water, watched, waited. The lights dimmed. Family through the years, the projector announced, and photos began to scroll. Baby Jody, prom queen Jody, college graduation Jody. Cheers erupted, followed by a manufactured tearful tone from her voiceover. Then came the final slide. Colleen Shipman divorced, mental breakdown, low income, unmarried, unsuccessful. Silence at first. Then a few chuckles, nervous laughter. Lorraine clinked her glass. Franklin nodded approvingly, and I stood up. My phone, already connected to the ballroom projector via hidden software, vibrated once in my palm. I tapped play. The screen flickered, then went dark, then burst into full color. A montage of audio clips played. Franklin's voice. She's a genetic mistake. I regret even signing her birth certificate. Lorraine, laughing. What kind of woman can't even carry a child? Of course David left her. The room turned to glass. Cold, still, reflective. Guests twisted in their seats. Phones appeared. Fingers hovered over record buttons. And then I spoke. This wasn't about celebrating love. This was about rewriting truth. So let me help you rewrite it properly. My voice echoed, smooth, sharp. A blade dressed as a greeting. Everything you've heard about me is their version. Now you'll hear mine. A reel of screenshots followed. Emails from Lorraine approving the slideshow. Franklin's directives to their PR team. Payment logs, bank statements, all of it. I looked at Jody. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Brent had turned to look at her, expressionless. Lorraine whispered something to Franklin, but he didn't respond. His mouth was tight. He was calculating, losing. And then I ended it with a pre-recorded clip. To the guests who laughed, watch what truth sounds like. The final screen read, "Healing begins in exposure." No one clapped. That was the loudest sound of all. The ballroom was frozen mid-breath. My voice still echoed in the speakers, but eyes had stopped blinking, mouths half open in disbelief. For a moment, even the chandeliers seemed to stop flickering. Then the screen went black. The live stream cut off, just like that. Gasps, whispers. A hotel staffer in a white blazer rushed toward the AV station, fumbling with cables and muttering into a headset. "We've lost the feed. I don't know how. I didn't move. I reached into my clutch, tapped once, and said nothing. Seconds later, the ballroom screen lit up again. Clearer, louder, live. My backup feed had just kicked in. The footage resumed, my father's voice describing me as a genetic fluke, Lorraine's laughter about my infertility, and a family Christmas clip I had recorded years ago, where I was compared to a dog who forgot its tricks. The crowd began shifting, some recording, some turning pale. It wasn't just spectacle anymore, it was exposure. And then Brent stood up. He had been stiff for most of the ceremony, but now he looked undone. His hand trembled slightly as he took the mic off the stand. Jody tried to touch his wrist. He pulled away. "Is this who you really are?" he asked her, voice hollow. She said nothing. "You told me Colleen made everything up, that she was jealous, unstable." He glanced at the screen. "You used this to build your image." Then he removed his ring, held it in his hand like it weighed 100 pounds. "I'm not marrying into this." He stepped down from the stage, passed by me without a word, and walked straight out the doors. Half the room followed him, the other half stayed, too stunned to move. Lorraine rushed forward, attempting to save face. "This is all a misunderstanding. You know how these things look, edited, taken out of context." Franklin stood, grabbed the mic. "We will pursue legal action for this defamation. You will regret embarrassing this family." I stepped forward, calm, poised. "My attorney is in this room. He came as my +1. Heads turned. A man in a navy suit nodded from the far corner, already holding a folder. I looked directly at Franklin. "You used shame to silence me. You used money to control me. And now you've lost the only thing that ever mattered to you, the illusion of being untouchable." He opened his mouth, then shut it. The silence was suffocating, and then I broke it. "You thought this was my lowest point," I said, slowly walking to the podium. "You haven't seen what I've saved for the court." And I let that sit in the air, untouched. No one dared to move. The ballroom was a wreckage of silence and fragments of shattered pride. Brent's footsteps had barely faded when I stepped forward, phone in hand, my voice steady. "This is the part you didn't expect," I said. I tapped the screen. The speakers popped, then a recording played. Brent's voice, reading an email Jody had once forwarded to him. She's not even a real woman. Can't have kids, can't hold a marriage, can't build a legacy. But sure, let's let her give a speech. Murmurs swelled into a wave. Brent stood by the open doors, still frozen, head low. That line wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. And it had come from the woman he was supposed to marry. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. The crowd already had. Then I said it. Clean, clear. I filed a lawsuit against Franklin and Lorraine DeVoe for long-term emotional abuse, public defamation, and targeted psychological harm. The reaction came in stutters. Someone gasped. One guest whispered, "Oh my God." The DJ took a half step back from his booth, like the legal system might reach across the cables and pull him in too. A man in a tailored navy suit rose from the back and walked forward. He held 2 sealed envelopes. My attorney. He handed one to my father, one to my mother. Franklin didn't even blink. Lorraine's hand hovered over her chest like she was waiting for a heart attack that wouldn't come. "This is absurd," she said through her teeth. "You want headlines? That's all this is." I didn't raise my voice. "You raised me on silence and shame. Now you'll sit in it." I lifted a USB drive. This contains audio recordings, emails, bank statements, and over a decade of evidence. The courts won't need my story, just the timeline. Jody stepped toward me, as if the last hour hadn't happened. Her voice cracked with false composure. "You're blowing everything out of proportion. Families fight. You could have come to us." I turned to her. "You mocked my trauma. Publicly. You don't get to ask for a private resolution." She opened her mouth again, but I cut her off with one look. The kind that says, "This conversation is done." "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "I'm doing it to stop being hurt by you." For the first time all night, applause broke out. Scattered, hesitant, but real. Brent walked back inside, stopped beside me. He didn't touch me, didn't ask for forgiveness, just said, quietly, "You were right. I should have said something sooner." I nodded. That was all there was left between us. From the back I saw Caleb. He didn't wave, didn't speak, but he was there, like always, silent, steady. "This isn't revenge," I said into the mic. "This is repair. I can't fix what you broke, but I can protect what I've rebuilt." Some guests left in shame. Others stood straighter, proud of their silence cracking. And then the final message flashed on the ballroom screen. A message from the live stream chat. "Thank you for speaking what so many of us can't." I stepped through the exit doors to the sound of press flashbulbs. For the first time in my life, I didn't hide my face. 1 week later, the storm still hadn't passed. It had simply moved online. The news anchor's voice drifted through the apartment like fog, polished, detached. Franklin DeVoe has filed a countersuit, accusing his daughter, Colleen Shipman, of defamation and family sabotage. I muted the TV before she got to the panel of talking heads debating whether I was brave or bitter. I'd already read the headlines, the comments, the think pieces. I knew some people called me a truth teller. Others thought I was performing trauma for clicks. None of them knew what it felt like to sit in a room full of people who clapped while you were stripped down into bullet points. I sipped lukewarm tea and turned back to my inbox. 3 more emails from strangers, survivors, people who said things like, "You gave me language," or "You reminded me that I wasn't crazy." I saved every one. The countersuit made the front page of 3 business magazines. But what the public didn't know was that, within hours of the announcement, 4 of Franklin's longtime business partners quietly pulled out of pending deals. Former employees began speaking up, anonymous but loud. Stories of intimidation, favoritism, and psychological manipulation stretched back decades. Lorraine had vanished from the country club circuit. Invitations stopped. So did her Botox appointments. And Jody, radio silence. No interviews, no social posts, just gone. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Some collapses are their own confession. I flew to New York 3 days after the press died down. A keynote address for Healing Hearts. Hundreds of people in the room. Survivors, therapists, advocates. I stepped on stage, looked into the lights, and said the line I hadn't rehearsed. I didn't burn bridges, I lit beacons. Applause filled the room. I smiled. But even as they clapped, my eyes searched the edges of the stage, still expecting something to go wrong. Some habits don't unlearn easily. That night, I returned home to an envelope sitting at my front door. No stamp, no name. Inside, a single photo. Me and Jody, ages 6 and 4, sitting in the backyard with ice pops melting down our wrists. Taped to the back was a note. "I'm trying." That was it. No apology, no excuses, just something between a beginning and a wound. I placed the photo on my desk beside the legal files. Didn't move it, didn't frame it. Just let it sit there like a breath I wasn't sure I should hold. Later, standing on my balcony, I watched the city below. Charlotte moved like nothing had ever happened. But inside me, something had. Justice isn't a clean cut. It's a quiet shift, a choice not to carry what they dropped on you. My phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "You gave me courage." I didn't reply. I just looked out at the skyline, heart thudding, not with rage, not with fear, just with life. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. Telling this story wasn't easy, but maybe that's the point. Sometimes the truth doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers through scars and silence, waiting for someone to finally give it a voice. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing not to let what broke you become what defines you. In this country, we value independence and strength, but real courage, I've found, is in reclaiming your worth after others tried to erase it. Maybe you've lived through something similar. Maybe your silence was survival. But here's my question to you. What's the truth you've been holding back? And what would happen if you finally spoke it? Let's open this space together. If this story moved you, comment 1 or tell me where you're watching from. If you disagreed or struggled with it, I'd love to hear why. This is a place for conversation, not perfection. And hey, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Your voice matters. You are not alone.